I never thought a chill night hanging out in my friend's basement would turn into one of those moments you replay in your head for months. Like a scene you didn't know was important until you're stuck thinking about it at 2 a.m. And honestly, if someone told me that locking a door could feel like the start of something huge, I probably wouldn't have believed them. But that's exactly how it went down. So here's the setup. I'd known Josh for a couple years from work. He's the kind of guy who's easy to talk to, the kind that somehow makes you feel like you've shared a secret, even when you're just talking about your weekend plans. We'd always kept it casual, mostly texting, grabbing drinks after shifts, nothing heavy. But that Friday night, he invited me over to his place. "Just chillin', in the basement," he said. "We'll grab some pizza, play some games, maybe watch a movie." It sounded low-key perfect, especially after a long week of work and too many awkward dates. When I got there, his basement felt like a little escape from the world. Dim lighting, a beat-up leather couch, shelves packed with vinyl records and old board games. He had this vintage arcade machine in the corner that looked like it belonged in the 80s. It was cozy in a way that made me want to stay there forever. Josh tossed me a couple of beers, and we started messing around with the arcade game, trading goofy trash talk and laughing way more than I expected. Up until that point, it was just two guys hanging out. But then, out of nowhere, Josh stood up, walked over to the door, and locked it. Not with some casual click, but with a deliberate turn and a quick glance back at me that made my stomach do a weird flip. I wasn't sure what to say. I mean, it wasn't like I was locked in a dungeon or anything, but suddenly the vibe shifted. Like the room got smaller and the air got thicker. I looked at him, trying to read what was going on behind that easy smile. He just shrugged, sat back down, and said, "Just making sure we're alone." And that's when I realized this wasn't going to be just another Friday night hangout. At first, I laughed it off, thinking he was joking. But the way he looked at me, so calm and confident, made me wonder if there was something more he was trying to say, or maybe something he was waiting for me to say first. That locked door felt like a signal, like the moment everything could flip from friendly to something else. And honestly, I didn't know if I was ready, but I couldn't leave either. Not when Josh was sitting there like this, like he was daring me to cross a line I hadn't even realized was there. So yeah, that's where it started, me, him, and a locked basement door, on a night that was supposed to be nothing special. And you know what? Sometimes, the most unexpected nights turn out to be the ones you never forget. I shifted on the couch, the beer suddenly tasting colder, like the room had this weird electric charge in it. I tried to play it cool, like I wasn't suddenly hyper-aware of every little thing Josh was doing. How he ran a hand through his hair like he was nervous, or how his eyes settled on mine with this intensity that made my chest tighten. So, I said, trying to break the silence, "Why lock the door? Just in case the pizza people decide to show up?" He laughed, but it was low and a little breathless. "No, man, I don't want distractions tonight, just us. No noise, no interruptions." That sounded a bit more serious than I expected. I raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like you've got something on your mind." Josh shrugged, but didn't look away. "Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. Depends on if you want to hear it or not." I swallowed hard. "Well, I'm here now. Might as well say it." He smiled then, this slow, almost shy grin that made the air between us shift again. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately. More than just friends, I mean." I blinked. The words hung there, awkward and heavy, and somehow exactly what I didn't know I was waiting for. "Really?" "Yeah," he said, his voice softer now. "I don't want to mess up what we have, but I don't want to pretend I'm cool with just being friends anymore." I felt my heart race, the kind of fast that's not just nerves but something else, something loud and impossible to ignore. Because yeah, I'd thought about Josh like that too, more times than I'd admit. But hearing it out loud, that was a different thing entirely. "Why now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What changed?" Josh shrugged again, but this time there was a little laugh in it. "I guess I just realized life's too short to keep things locked up. Literally and figuratively." He gestured toward the door with a grin. I laughed, the tension easing just a bit. "Fair point." We sat there for a moment, just looking at each other, the quiet hum of the basement filling the space between us. I could tell Josh was waiting for me to say something, anything, that would make this less scary, so I took a breath and leaned a little closer. I've thought about it too, more than once. His eyes lit up, and it was like the whole room warmed up. Really? Yeah, I said, feeling like maybe, just maybe, this locked basement was the safest place I'd been in a long time. I just didn't know if you felt the same. Josh's smile was wide now, like a kid who just got exactly the answer he hoped for. Guess we're both on the same page, huh? We laughed again, but it was a different kind of laugh, lighter, like a weight had been lifted. Then he reached out, his hand brushing mine on the couch armrest. My skin tingled where we touched. Can I be honest? He asked after a beat. Always. I'm scared, Josh said, voice dropping to almost a whisper. Scared that this could ruin us, or that you might not want the same thing. I nodded, understanding completely. Yeah, that's the worst part. Putting everything on the line and hoping it doesn't break you. Exactly. We sat there, hands still close but not quite holding, letting the silence fill in the cracks. Then Josh's phone buzzed from the side table, and I realized how long we'd been sitting like that. He glanced at it and then back at me. Pizza's here, he said, standing up. I got up too, and as he unlocked the door, I couldn't help but think about how different the night felt now. That locked door wasn't a trap or a threat. It was kind of a promise. Like we were starting something new, even if we didn't know exactly where it would go. We ate pizza on the couch, playing music off his record player, the basement feeling less like just a hangout spot and more like the beginning of something. Josh kept stealing looks at me, like he was trying to read my mind, and honestly, I was doing the same. Later, after the pizza was gone and the games were put away, Josh moved closer on the couch. His hand found mine again, and this time he didn't let go. Want to watch that movie? He asked, voice a little uncertain. Yeah, I said, heart pounding. Let's. And as the screen flickered on, I realized that sometimes the best nights aren't planned. Sometimes you just have to lock the door and see what happens when it's just the two of you. The movie started, but honestly, I wasn't paying much attention to the screen. Josh was sitting so close now that our shoulders were touching, and I could feel the warmth radiating from him. It was like the basement had shrunk even more, and suddenly it was just the two of us in this bubble where nothing else mattered. Every now and then, Josh would steal a glance at me, and I'd catch his eye. We'd both look away quickly, like kids caught passing notes in class. It was ridiculous, but that shy little dance made it all feel even more real somehow. About halfway through the movie, there was this quiet pause where the music swelled, and Josh shifted on the couch, his hand inching closer to mine. I didn't move away. Instead, I let my fingers brush against his, and he squeezed gently. I swallowed, heart hammering louder than the movie soundtrack. So, I whispered, what happens now? We've said the big stuff, but what about the little stuff? Josh tilted his head, considering. Like, what? Like, if you have to tell your parents someday. Or what we do when we get stressed at work. Or how we argue. You know, actual real-life stuff. He laughed softly. Man, you make it sound like we're already a thing. Maybe I'm hoping we are. Josh looked at me then, serious and steady. I want to be. I just don't want to rush it. I want to figure it out with you. That hit me harder than I expected. It was one thing to hear the words, I like you, but hearing, I want to figure it out with you felt like a promise wrapped in patience. Like he was willing to take the time to understand me, flaws and all. A few minutes later, the movie ended, and Josh reached over to turn off the player. The basement plunged back into that soft glow from the lamps, and he shifted closer, resting his head against my shoulder. I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned my head on his, feeling this odd mix of comfort and excitement. It was the kind of quiet that says, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. We stayed like that for a while, just soaking in the moment. I think we both knew this was the start of something new, but we weren't rushing to label it or figure it out completely. Sometimes just being together was enough. After a bit, Josh whispered, Thanks for staying tonight, for real. I looked at him, surprised. I was never gonna leave, he grinned, that same easy smile that made my heart skip a beat. Good, because I want there to be a lot more nights like this. I smiled back, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Me too. Eventually, the night had to end. We made our way upstairs, the basement door staying unlocked this time, like it was no longer a barrier, but an open invitation. As I walked out into the cool night air, I realized that sometimes the scariest moments, the ones where you lock a door and hold your breath, are just the beginning of the best stories. And I was ready to see where this one would go. The next morning, I woke up with that weird mix of excitement and nerves buzzing under my skin. You know the kind, like when you've just done something totally out of your comfort zone, but it felt right, so right that it makes you second guess everything. I stared at my phone for a good 10 minutes before I finally screwed up the courage to text Josh me. Last night was better than I expected. His reply came almost immediately. Josh. I was hoping you'd say that. I grinned, and the rest of the day passed in this strange haze. Work felt both too long and too short, and every time my phone buzzed, part of me hoped it was him. Spoiler, it usually was. When I got off, I debated messaging him again, but figured I'd just stop by. It wasn't like I had an excuse, but sometimes you just go with the gut. I texted him. Me, mind if I swing by? I left some of my stuff at your place. Josh, come on over. Walking back into that basement felt like stepping back into a secret club. The same cozy vibe, the same beat-up couch, but now it carried this new warmth between us that wasn't just from the lamps. Josh greeted me with a smile that made me forget whatever awkward jitters I'd had outside. Hey, he said, gesturing to the couch. Pizza again? Don't mind if I do, I said, plopping down next to him. We fell into an easy rhythm, eating, talking, sharing little stories about nothing and everything. That's when I noticed he'd set up a couple of candles on the side table. It wasn't much, but it made the room feel different, more intentional. So, I said, nudging him playfully. This is fancy now, huh? Josh laughed. I figured if I was going to keep you around, I might as well set the mood. I rolled my eyes but couldn't stop smiling. Smooth. We talked about everything and nothing for hours. The things you only share when you start trusting someone a little more. Childhood embarrassments, dumb dreams, that weird obsession with that one band you pretend not to like. At some point, the conversation grew quieter, like the air thickened again, but in a good way. Josh looked at me, blinking slowly, and I could tell he was gathering his courage for something. Can I ask you something? He said. I nodded, heart racing. Would you want to go on an actual date with me? Like, not just hanging out in my basement or after work drinks, but something real? I blinked, a little surprised. Real, huh? Yeah. He bit his lip, nervous but hopeful. I want to see you outside of all this. Get to know you better. I felt my insides twist in the best way possible. I'd like that. Josh's grin was infectious. Good, because I was worried you'd say no. No way, I said. I'm in. We sat there for a moment, just soaking in that new step we'd taken without even realizing. Later, as the night deepened, Josh pulled me closer. This time, the touch wasn't tentative. His fingers laced with mine, and I could feel the steady beat of his heart. It was like everything we'd held back was finally starting to breathe. Promise me something? He whispered. Anything. That we take this slow. No rushing, no pressure. Just us, figuring it out. I smiled, squeezing his hand. Promise. That night, when I finally left, the door stayed unlocked. Because sometimes, the best things start not with locking doors, but by opening them wide and stepping inside together. The days after that night felt like I was walking on this weird, exhilarating tightrope, balancing the thrill of what was happening with the fear of messing it all up. I kept replaying every little interaction with Josh in my head, analyzing his texts, the way he laughed at my dumb jokes, the way his eyes lingered a second longer than usual. It was like suddenly the whole world had been put under a microscope, and I was hyper-aware of every nervous smile and shy glance. A few evenings later, Josh invited me out for dinner. Real dinner, not just pizza on a couch. He picked this little Italian place he'd been raving about for weeks. I'll admit, I was a little nervous. What if the easy vibe from the basement didn't translate? What if the spark only existed in that safe, quiet space? But when I walked in and saw him waiting by the window, dressed like he'd actually put an effort, all those worries melted away. He stood up, smiled that same easy smile that had become my favorite thing, and said, "You look good." I felt my cheeks heat up. "You're not so bad yourself." We slid into a booth and the conversation flowed like water. Natural, effortless. We talked about weird childhood memories, music tastes, dreams we were embarrassed to admit, and even the awkwardness that comes with dating as a not-so-out guy. There was something about Josh that made all those uncomfortable things seem less daunting. At one point, he leaned in and whispered, "I've been wanting to do this for a while." Then he brushed a stray hair off my forehead, his fingertips lingering just a second longer than necessary. My heart was doing that familiar flip-flop, and I couldn't help but smile. Me too. After dinner, we took a walk through the neighborhood. The streetlights cast this soft glow, and everything felt hushed, like we were in our own little world. Josh slipped his hand into mine, and I didn't pull away. It was one of those moments where silence says everything. But then, out of nowhere, he stopped and turned to me, eyes serious. "Can I ask you something a little personal?" "Shoot," I said, curious and a little nervous. He bit his lip. "What do you want from all this?" "From us?" I blinked. It was a big question, one I'd been avoiding, even to myself. "I guess I want to find someone who gets me, someone I can be real with, no masks, no pretending. And if that's you, I'm not gonna lie, I'm all in." Josh smiled, soft, genuine, like he'd been holding his breath and just exhaled. "Yeah, me too." We kept walking, hands still intertwined, until we reached a small park bench. We sat down, and I felt this sudden urge to be closer. Josh turned to me, his eyes searching mine, and before I knew it, he was leaning in. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, like testing the waters, but it quickly deepened, that spark from the basement igniting into something stronger. When we pulled apart, breathless, Josh grinned. "Wow, that was everything." I laughed, heart pounding. "You're not wrong." From that night on, things shifted, but slowly. We kept hanging out in the basement, went on more real dates, and shared parts of ourselves we kept hidden for too long. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments, missteps, and fears, but it was ours. One night, a few weeks later, Josh invited me back to his basement. The door was unlocked, but he looked at me with that familiar teasing glint in his eye and said, "Remember when I locked this door the first time?" I nodded, smiling. "Yeah, I thought you were kidnapping me." He laughed. "Maybe I was. But now I just want this to be a place where we can be ourselves. No secrets." We sat down on the couch, and this time there was no need to lock the door. Because I knew, whatever happened next, we'd face it together. And honestly, that felt like the best kind of freedom. There was something about that basement. Maybe it was the way the dim lights softened all the sharp edges, or maybe it was just us, finally feeling like we could drop the masks. I remember sitting there with Josh, both of us a little quieter than usual after that last conversation, like we'd reached some unspoken understanding. I glanced around the room, the old posters on the walls, the scattered game controllers, the half-empty beer bottles on the side table, and it hit me how much had changed since that very first night. Back then, the locked door felt like a barrier, like a moment of tension that could either break us or bring us closer. Now, it felt more like a threshold we'd crossed together. Josh caught my eye and smiled softly. "You know, I used to be really scared about letting anyone in, even friends. I built all these walls, and I thought they kept me safe." I nodded because I understood that feeling more than I wanted to admit. "But being with you," he continued, "it's like those walls don't seem as necessary anymore." I felt something warm and raw stir inside me. I get that. I've always been afraid that if I let someone in, they'd see the stuff I'm not proud of and run. Josh reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek gently. "I'm not going anywhere." That simple promise pulled me closer, and before I could overthink it, I leaned into his touch. For a while, we just sat there, connected in a way that felt new and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Eventually, Josh broke the silence. "Want to hear something embarrassing?" I grinned. "Bring it on." He laughed, a little nervous. The first time I realized I liked guys was actually because of a crush on a guy from my high school theater group. I was 15, and I thought it was a phase, so I never told anyone. 15, huh? I said, imagining teenage Josh, awkward and unsure, but already knowing something was different. "Yeah," he said. "I was scared of being found out, so I pushed it deep down. For years." I looked at him, feeling this mix of admiration and understanding. It takes guts to admit that now. Josh shrugged, but his smile was shy. I figure it's easier when you're not alone. We talked for hours after that, peeling back layers of ourselves we'd kept hidden. I shared my own stories, growing up feeling like I didn't fit, pretending to be someone else just to avoid questions or judgment. By the time we finally stood up to call it a night, the basement felt less like a hideout and more like home. As I walked up the stairs, Josh's hand found mine again, squeezing gently. "I'm really glad you stayed." "Me too," I said, meaning every word. The days that followed were a blur of new experiences. Our first real date outside the basement, holding hands in public, the nervous excitement of introducing him to a few close friends. It wasn't always easy. Navigating this new territory came with its own set of challenges. But with Josh, even the uncomfortable moments felt manageable. One afternoon, we found ourselves back in the basement after a long day. The sun filtered through the small windows, casting soft shadows across the room. Josh was sitting on the couch, flipping through a record sleeve. "I found this at a thrift store last weekend," he said, holding up an old vinyl. "Thought you might like it." I took it from him, the cover worn, but the artwork striking. "You remembered," he grinned. "How could I forget? That little gesture stuck with me." It wasn't grand or flashy, just quietly thoughtful. It was the kind of thing that showed me he was paying attention, that he cared. We spent the rest of the afternoon listening to music, the kind that made you want to close your eyes and get lost in the moment. Josh rested his head on my shoulder, and I wrapped an arm around him, feeling like maybe, just maybe, this was what I'd been waiting for all along. Later, as the evening crept in, we talked about the future, not in some overwhelming, pressure-filled way, but as a gentle hope. Places we wanted to travel, things we wanted to learn, the kind of life we wanted to build together. And through it all, that basement remained our sanctuary, a place where we could be messy, honest, and real. Looking back now, I realized that night when Josh locked the door was never about keeping me in. It was about creating a space where we could both be brave enough to open up. And that made all the difference. After that afternoon in the basement, things started feeling less like a whirlwind and more like a steady rhythm, like we were falling into something real, something that didn't have to be rushed or forced. It wasn't perfect, of course. There were still awkward moments, little missteps, and the occasional fear that maybe one of us was reading too much into things. But the foundation felt solid, and that was enough. A couple of weeks later, Josh invited me to meet his roommates. I was nervous at first. Meeting the people who share your space always feels like a trial run for the real deal. But when I got there, they were surprisingly easygoing, cracking jokes and making me feel welcome without any weird probing questions. One of them, a guy named Marcus, asked, "So, you and Josh, huh? Been seeing each other for a while?" Josh shot me a look, half smiling, half warning, but I just shrugged. "Yeah, we've been hanging out a lot. It's been good." Marcus nodded like he approved, which was a relief. The atmosphere stayed light, and by the end of the night, I realized that this little group of people was becoming part of the bigger picture, part of the life Josh and I were starting to build. Later that evening, after the roommates had gone to bed, Josh and I found ourselves back in the basement, sprawled out on the couch with a half-empty bottle of whiskey between us. "I like that you fit in here," I said, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. Josh smiled. "Yeah? I was worried you'd think this place was too messy," I laughed. "Messy's fine. It's real. It's you." He looked at me, eyes softer than usual. "I want you to know something. I'm serious about this. About us." I felt a rush of warmth, that same flutter I'd felt the first time he locked that door. "I am too." We clinked glasses, and the night slipped into a comfortable quiet. But then Josh shifted, turning toward me. "Can I be honest?" he asked. "Always. I'm scared. Scared that I'll mess this up. That I'm not enough." I reached out, taking his hand in mine. "Josh, you're more than enough. We're figuring this out together." He hesitated for a moment, then leaned in, resting his forehead against mine. "Thanks for sticking around. Wouldn't want to be anywhere else." Those words felt like a promise, a quiet vow between us. Over the next few months, we navigated the usual ups and downs. First dates that turned into second and third. Awkward family dinners. Late-night talks about fears and dreams. And the kind of small gestures that slowly knit two lives together. Making coffee just the way I like it. Leaving notes on the fridge. Sharing playlists that meant something. One chilly evening, Josh invited me over with a text. "Got something to show you." When I arrived, he led me to the basement where the room had been transformed. String lights hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow. Cushions and blankets were scattered across the floor, and in the center was a small makeshift screen with a projector. "Movie night," he announced, grinning. I smiled, touched by the effort. "You're spoiling me." He shrugged modestly. "You deserve it." As the movie played, we curled up together on the floor. Halfway through, Josh took my hand, intertwining our fingers. The moment felt effortless, like breathing. When the credits rolled, he turned to me, eyes shining. "I don't want this to be just movie nights and basement hangouts forever. I want more." I nodded, heart pounding. "Me too." He smiled, that familiar, hopeful smile, and leaned in for a kiss. Soft at first, then deeper. Afterward, as we lay there tangled together, I realized that the basement, the locked door, the late-night talks, they were all part of a journey. A journey from fear to trust, from uncertainty to something real. And as I looked at Josh, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Months later, as I sat on that same basement couch with Josh beside me, I couldn't help but think about how far we'd come. It wasn't some whirlwind romance or a movie-perfect fairy tale. Far from it. There were bumps, doubts, and moments when neither of us knew what the next step should be. But what made it real was that we faced those moments together, with honesty and patience. That night, Josh pulled out an old photo album he'd found, tucked away on a shelf. We flipped through pages filled with snapshots from his life. Childhood birthdays, awkward teen years, family holidays. He paused on a picture of him as a kid, eyes wide and hopeful, and said quietly, "I never thought I'd be the guy who'd let someone in like this." I smiled, squeezing his hand. Me neither. But here we are. He looked at me, a little vulnerable and yet steady. "Thank you for staying, for being patient, for seeing me." I let the words settle, feeling the weight and warmth in them. "Thank you for trusting me." We sat there for a while, no need for more words. The basement, once a place of guarded moments and locked doors, had become our sanctuary, a space where we could be messy, scared, hopeful, and utterly ourselves. Later, as I headed home, I realized something important. Love isn't always about grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes, it's about the quiet moments, the locked doors that lead to open hearts, the shared fears that become shared strength. And that's what we built together. Not a fairy tale, but something better, something real. I smiled to myself, already looking forward to the next night in that basement, where the door was always open and so were we.